Hi, folks, and welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Ben Rabidoux. If you missed it for some reason, go back and look at Monday's video. I sit down with Ben, and in part 1, we talked a lot about things in the past. We talked about pandemic-related interest rate environments. We talked about coming out of the high interest rates and what the Bank of Canada is doing. In part 2, we're going to go and we're going to talk about the market. We're going to speak to some of the CMHC policies that have been enacted in the last little while. We're going to make some predictions for the future. And of course, we're going to talk about the condo market, housing completions, housing starts, and all things related. So without further ado, let's get to part 2. Okay, we are back here with Ben Rabidoux. If you missed part 1, it's good. Go back and listen to it or watch it. And we're going to talk more. First segment, we were talking a lot about interest rates, Bank of Canada, and what they did 4 years ago. I think now we're going to chat about things moving forward. Ben, we were just talking off camera. I gave you some ideas and you were all eager to go. Why don't you hit it?
Yeah, happy to. Well, I think, okay, so if you take a snapshot of the current market, you're sitting at all-time highs in terms of condo listings on the market. A lot of one-bedroom, a lot of stuff that, as you know well, is not necessarily like a lot of kind of cookie-cutter smaller units. If you're looking for something a little more desirable, larger unit, there's a lot fewer of them. But set that aside, lots of inventory in the condo market. No reason to think that's not going to continue, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, on the single family, it gets a little more interesting because they're like you are sitting at the highest level of standing inventory since 2009. But when you look out at what's happening with housing starts and building permits, this is something I've been flagging for a long time. We've had building permits now that are at 40-year lows in Ontario and have been running at that level for the last year and a half. We've had housing starts now that have fallen to basically 60-year lows for single family specifically in Ontario. You're in this weird situation where, like, I could argue it both ways. Like, I've kind of said to some of my clients, I've got some developer clients that kind of want to pick my brain about where I think parts the, like, you know, I'm really bullish on certain parts of the country. I've been extremely bullish on Alberta for a long time. I actually think now, like I was extremely bullish on Calgary. I actually think Edmonton's going to do amazing than that and outperform. Really bullish on Saskatchewan. Getting pretty bullish on parts of Quebec. So like, there's lots of areas where I'm bullish. Right now, I just think like Toronto, it's almost like for the time being, it's almost in the too hard bucket. Like I could argue it both ways. There is going to come a point where demand's going to start coming back. And it's going to come into a supply constrained market because there's just not going to be a lot of new completions. What is on the market will get, that inventory will evaporate pretty quickly once sales start to normalize.
Yeah.
And the thing you got to remember is if you look at sales on a per capita basis, one of the things I've been pointing out to my clients on Edge Analytics is on a per capita basis, sales in Ontario are basically at the lowest level since the 90s and have been there for over a year. So that tells you there's a lot of pent up demand. Right. And so that at some point that gets unleashed, everything is cyclical. Single family housing demand is going to start to come back at some point, whether that's a 25 story, whether it's 26 story. I don't know. I think it's probably starting to inflect higher right now. And you can certainly make the argument that that's going to hit into a supply constrained market. And that's going to be that market will tighten really quickly. That's the possibility. Condos are even more tough to kind of get a handle on because you got a lot of completions. You're going to have, you know, very strong completions for probably most of the next 2 years. But then beyond that, like I've got this great chart where I look at new condo sales and you kind of overlay it on top of condo starts.
Yeah.
And you can see the condo starts are going to get absolutely smashed. Like they're going to be almost zero. Like they're extremely low for a couple of years. And what that tells you is that, like, yeah, you've got an oversupplied market right now. It's probably going to stay oversupplied for a little while. But man, you push this out to 28, there's going to be like almost no completions, 29, same thing. So even there, you can see where like everything is cyclical. You know, the bad times set up the make the setup for the good times. And you could argue even there, there's going to be an opportunity, maybe a 26 story to start looking for some really compelling. I don't know, but that's kind of my lay of the land. Now, that's like high level. The other thing I would point out is I think, so going back to this concept of pent up demand, I've said to my clients, I think you're going to have at least 6 months of really good sales, like strong sales. Like you'll see an uptick, you'll have a decent winter. I think you're setting up for a decent spring next year. Beyond that, who knows? Like, and again, I think that a lot of that is related to this pent up demand, cutting rates, and then you're starting to see consumer confidence come back. So I think those three things, lower rates, higher confidence, pent up demand, you're going to have like at least 6 months of decent sales. Then you get into the question of like, well, how seriously should you take the whole Trump tariff threat? Because that's not a small issue for a lot of these Ontario towns.
Yeah.
You know, if Trump really does put a 10% tariff on all manufactured imports, that's just a really big problem. So that's a 25 story, and you never know with Trump because a lot of the stuff he says is just a negotiating tactic, and he's not actually serious. Like, who the hell knows with Trump?
That's what I was
But
thinking. Yeah.
yeah, so right now I just think from my perspective, you're not going to love to hear this, but from my perspective, if I had $1 million to allocate and I was going to invest somewhere, in my way of thinking is there's parts of the country that have really clear long-term tailwinds behind them. And when I say long-term tailwinds, what I look for in a market is I look for very low resale inventory, strong demand, but more importantly, I look at what's under construction for homeowner units. So I back out rentals, and there you have a snapshot of what could prospectively become resale supply in the future. So if you find a market that's got good economic fundamentals, very tight resale market, strong demand, very little resale inventory in the pipeline, you don't have to overthink it. That's a market that's going to perform well for the next year or two. And so that's what got me bullish on Calgary. What's got me very bullish on Edmonton, Saskatchewan, parts of Quebec. It's less clear in Ontario that the inflection point. So I just feel like you could do really well investing in Ontario right now and in Toronto. I don't know, but I just feel like for my money, there's just easier places to make money that are there's less uncertainty around the outlook.
So I have so many thoughts and follow-ups to that, but before I forget, an anecdotal story. This is one I haven't told you, and off air, maybe I'll give you some more info.
I love your anecdotes, by the way. Every time I'm like, I perk right up.
Well, because I can't name names, but I will off air. So, as I've told you before, side hustle for me, I work on land consolidations, land assemblies, and I've been doing it for about 6 years. And I work with a pretty prominent developer, of course, through a middleman, because you know how these folks are. This very prominent developer is completely uninterested in building condos. Doesn't want to do it. You know why? Because the government's going to loan 95% if they build a rental. So picture this. Let's say there's a site in downtown Toronto. I pitched them 2 years ago, and they were ready to buy that site to build a condo or to try to build a condo for, say, 40 million. That site that we offered 40 million on and didn't even get a conversation was now offered to me for 25 million because the person who owns it is hurting. And the only way that this developer would consider buying this is if they were to build a rental. Because number one, the city of Toronto will probably work with you if you want to build rentals. If you want to build a condo, you've got to rezone all this stuff. This is zoned neighborhoods, not apartments. So number one, you need the city to work with you. Number two, if the federal government's going to loan you 95% of the cost, this developer is laughing and saying, this is my new business model. So imagine a condo developer getting out of the condo development game and getting into rentals. Like, what does this say for the future of the resale condo market? Does this add more fuel to the fire for, you're saying 28, 29 when nothing's completed? Because I see zero, well, not zero, but what's the stats? Like, pre-construction sales are down 80%. Why they're not down 100%, I don't know. Who's paying $1,800 a foot for something right now?
I'll tell you why they're not down. I'll tell you why they're not down. It's
Sure.
You get some units. Well, that's not true. That's more the single family space. But you're seeing like townhomes that are very specifically being laid out to accommodate, for example, international students. You get 8 bedrooms, right?
Yeah.
So those things are still moving. Right?
The old 8-bedroom town. Yeah.
Yeah, like crazy stuff like that. I've seen some of that stuff. Those sell out quickly.
The funny part about that 8-bedroom town is it's only 700 square feet.
Oh, I know, man.
I'm kidding.
I know. Okay, so listen, I'll give you an unconventional view.
Sure.
So I would tell your developer friend to make use of that program while it lasts.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not going to last. And here's why I would say that. First off, if you look at what's under construction for rentals, people are kind of quietly sleeping on the fact that we've got like a ton of rentals under construction. So if you look at it in the context of the existing rental stock, you have about 7% of the existing rental stock that's under construction, which means all else equal, over the next couple of years, that rental stock is going to expand by 7%. Now that's going to come online so let's get back to what the government's trying to do in terms of curbing population growth.
Yeah.
All of that curbing the population growth is coming via a reduction of temporary residents. Okay. And by their own math, they're targeting a 900,000 reduction in temporary residents over the next 2 years. They're all renters. Yeah. So the one thing that's driven up the rental market that's caused all the craziness is that we had this enormous expansion of temporary workers, international students. I mean, there were 2 years running, we had 800,000 annual growth, 2 years running. I mean, you drop 1.5 million temporary residents into the country and they're all renters, like your rental market goes apeshit.
Yeah.
But
And
now
it
let's look
did.
at the flip
Yeah.
side of that.
Yeah.
So now you're in an era where the government's telling you they're actually going to shrink that number. Now we can talk about how plausible that is. I think it's extremely plausible they're going to get there.
Sure.
And that's going to happen into an environment where you've got a 6 or 7% expansion in the existing rental stock. I'm telling you, we're going to be here. You come back here 2 years from now, the vacancy rate of purpose built is not going to be 1, 2, 3. It'll be double that.
I I'm gonna bookmark that somehow. I probably won't remember. My short-term memory's
And
going,
so
but
and so then the next question is, in that environment, is there still going to be an appetite, especially under conservative government that has been highly antagonistic towards CMHC? Is there still
yeah,
going to be an appetite for those 95% LTV loans from the
yeah.
government? So I would say get it while the getting's good.
Interesting. Okay. So then in terms of the labor market, construction costs, whether it's, the HST, what I'm seeing and what I've written about on my blog, and this is going to sound highly unoriginal for somebody with slightly fiscal conservative views, is that people are so quick to blame investors, developers, speculators, real estate agents for the run up in real estate prices. But if you look at what it costs to construct a square foot, it's 1,000, 1,100. You have expenses running absolutely out of control. Is it any wonder right now you've got a developer that needs to charge 1,700 a foot in downtown Toronto and pre-con? No one wants to pay it. It comes with all the caveats of the uncertainty, the delays, the
Yeah.
deficiencies, the cancellations. The investors aren't into it. How in the world are we actually going to get a shovel in the ground over the next, say, 3 or 4 years when it's costing more just to build than it does to buy resale next door, irrespective of
Yeah.
a profit or a desire for a developer?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think you
What?
can.
I thought you were
I
going to
don't think you
tell
can.
me.
Like, no, I don't have a clue. So you're hitting on the fundamental pinch point in the market. And the one thing that's interesting is you are starting to see a bit of recognition that that's where the pinch point
I hope.
is that in that the absurd, irresponsible run up in development charges
Thank you.
is actually a fundamental impingement on trying to
Thank
restore
you.
affordability.
Thank you.
So look, you're starting to see that recognition. The question then is just like, well, where the hell do you make up the revenue? And that's, but from from what I'm seeing out of Ottawa, they're recognizing that's where the pinch point is, and they're trying to figure out how they can get the cities on board. You're starting to see some municipalities recognize it. Man, I don't have a good answer for that. The math doesn't math, right?
Well,
Like you can't make those numbers work.
the thing about taxes is you have to take from Peter to pay Paul. So the irony is, and I don't care who it is, if Doug Ford wants to cut the license plate renewal and I'm put $200 in your pocket, great. $200 coming from someone else's pocket. So no matter which government does it, municipal, provincial, or federal, and no matter what tax it is. But the reality is, I've been saying, and just as I was early, if I want to toot my own horn here for a change,
Do it.
I was a bit early in terms of oh my God, there's so many issues with pre-construction back when people were like threatening me.
Yeah,
And
man, you nailed that. You don't get enough credit for nailing that as well as you did.
I
And
appreciate
also
that.
for being, let me pump you for it, because I
Here we
think,
go.
no, seriously, man, because I think you went out of your way and against potentially your own business interests
And
to
career.
flag that risk
Yeah.
of buying at a substantial premium to resale
Yeah.
and what that could imply when it comes time to closing if that gap doesn't narrow. And so much of what you were writing about years ago is now starting to come to pass. So
And
like kudos to you, man, because that's not an easy thing to do in your industry, like to go out there and like talk against the interests of some
no,
of the
and I
powerful
got
players.
threats from agents, from brokerages, from lawyers, from developers. I was
Yeah.
doing, you remember the pre-construction versus cake video filmed on a shaky
I
handy
fucking
cam?
love those, man. I love those. Those are so good.
It was literally, and if you look at the footage today, it's like, sorry, was this on your BlackBerry? It was like, no, this is on my Nokia 9800. But the other thing I was going to say was that I was early to this idea that, sounds somewhat libertarian, but like the government's driving up the price of real estate. And everyone was like, no, it's evil developers. And you see these signs, for a development downtown and somebody spray paints, like, on the side of it, like, screw
No more
developers or
condos.
whatever.
Yeah.
25 to 30% of the cost of new construction is through the three levels of government. I've been saying this for 10 years. And just like with pre-construction, just like with the Condominium Act and all the issues and with the cancellations, 2 years ago, government starts standing up and saying, we've got to do something about these cancellations. I've been saying this for 15 years. The cost of building a square foot, if you had a $600,000 one bed, one bath, it would be $430,000 without any taxes. And I know that's unrealistic, but the point is, there is so much tax embedded in the cost of building. And now you've seen that big conglomerate of developers that put together an open letter and said to the government, you've got
Yeah.
to help us. And everyone's going to say, screw the man, screw commerce, screw corporations. But Ben, I don't understand how anything is going to get built. And aside from the, international student rooming house, if you're trying to build downtown Toronto, no one wants 300 square foot condos and no one wants to pay 1,800 a foot. And I've already asked you and you said, I don't know. So it's rhetorical, but I look at, and like full disclosure, I bought 2 condos this year. I've told you, I've told some of your clients, I've written about it on my blog. Maybe I was 6 months early. I bought the first one in Feb, but like this is a long-term play for me. And I'm looking at 3 years from now and we've got zero completions because no
Yep.
developer sold anything in 2024. No one's going to sell anything in 2025. If it's going to
Yep.
cost $1,100 to build a square foot of condominium downtown, how the heck is a developer supposed to sell anything?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. If you're buying something that's way under the cost of production, I mean, over the long term, it's really hard to lose money.
That was my
I look,
thinking.
I can't argue that. I mean,
Yeah.
like I don't know what the solution is, but you are starting to see like a glimmer that maybe municipalities are starting to recognize that they've got a
Yeah.
role in this. Like maybe problem with you see the problem, and I've argued this for a while too, and I don't know what the answer is, by the way. So I'm pointing to the same problem you are.
Yep.
But like I've said for a while that you've got this weird scenario where the demand function for real estate is largely controlled at the federal level,
Yeah.
right? It's immigration, it's income taxes, it's CMHC, it's monetary policy, which technically isn't federal, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, it's
It's at the high
taxation.
level.
It's yeah.
Yeah, but then the supply response is largely determined by municipalities. And there you've
Mhm.
got every Joe Blow counselor's got to listen to his next door neighbor bitch
I know.
about, oh, I don't want that shadow
I know.
there's gonna be too much traffic. Like you can't get anything built that way. So you are seeing this recognition out of Ottawa that they need like this carrot and stick approach where they basically have to force municipalities to get their goddamn act together
Yeah.
and pull in the same direction because that is where the issue is.
Well, you raise the point. I mean, God, if only there was some power to make the mayor strong. Maybe you could call it the strong mayor power. I don't know. Oh, wait, we just switched to a left wing mayor that probably won't get anything built. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you see it all the time. And I always say, look, I sympathize with city councilors. It's a job. They're in for 4 years. They have to do what constituents want. And when someone says, I don't want that building there, they're going to go with those people no matter
Yep.
what. But I look at
Yep.
in my area, Midtown and Leaside, you've got all these plans for towers, which is great planning because it's near the subway. We spend billions of dollars to run a subway across the center of the city, and every single person in this area has a sign on their lawn saying no construction, no towers, poor planning,
Yeah.
and the city councilors are just going to go with it. So I know we're on borrowed time here, Ben. So just a couple more questions. CMHC, they increased the mortgage cap from 1 million to
Yep.
1.5 million. They increased amortization to 30 years. Good policy, bad policy? Is this long overdue? And then sort of what do you see on the horizon of any other policies?
Yep. So the 30-year, I think makes total sense. There's no fundamental reason to lock someone into 25 years. We've had 30-year mortgages in the US forever. They work fine. We've had
Sure.
30-year uninsured in Canada forever. They work fine. So I don't have any fundamental issue with that. The 1.5 million, I would push back a little only because,
Yep.
like, man, in my neck of the woods, which is, a little bit removed from Toronto, 1.5 million still you're sitting lakefront. Like
Yeah.
you've got a nice place lakefront. So if you go back to the original iteration of CMHC, it was originally set up after World War II to help returning veterans get into entry-level housing.
Yeah.
And that's what its initial mandate was. And so if you look at other insurance schemes globally, like for example, even in the US, most of them have this kind of tiered model where if you're in a high cost of living area, the insurance is capped at X, and if you're in a lower cost of area, it's capped at Y. Because
Right.
the thinking is you don't want to be providing government backstop and artificially low mortgages for someone to effectively get into a 5, 6 bedroom lakefront
Wait, is that
home.
is that is that not the intent of this?
Well, that you could argue that.
That
You
was
could argue that.
sarcasm. I was being
Yeah.
sarcastic.
Like, I mean, to me, that's just crazy policy. So, like, you could make the argument that, yeah, maybe 1.5 million in Toronto, Vancouver, a handful of metros makes sense. Like, you almost need a tiered approach. In these expensive, in like the tier A metros that are most expensive, here's your cap. And
Yeah.
like that to me makes a lot more sense. But I would say I would caution all of that. I guess I would add to all of that, like, man, I'm highly skeptical that those changes are going to survive the next election.
Really? You think they could unwind it? Wow.
Well, just go back and listen. I went back and listened to every interaction that Mr. Poilievre's had
Yeah.
with the heads of CMHC, whether it
Yeah.
was Evan Siddall or whether it was Romy Bowers. I mean, anyone from CMHC, that dude is on their ass about everything.
Yeah.
He is highly antagonistic to everything and very much not in favor of the kind of distorting effect of insurance, and also has made a number of good points very publicly about like, hey, can you name another insurance scheme globally
Hmm.
where the covered party does not pay a deductible?
Yeah, I know.
Right. And they're always like, no.
Well,
Right. He's
it's
like, well, why? Right. So I'm just saying, like this idea that a conservative government's gonna love a massive expansion in that program, especially one that deviates so far from their core mandate.
yeah.
I think I just can't see it surviving.
I mean, it is somewhat unprecedented. And you know what? I read on my blog, and I'm going to typecast and say that they're usually an older demographic, but the people that have an issue with CMHC, they continue to say, why am I, the Canadian taxpayer, backstopping the banks who are backstopping a young person that wants to buy for 1.5 million with 150,000 down? Somebody wants to buy for 1.5 and take out a $1,350,000 mortgage. Why do
Yeah.
I, the taxpayer, have to backstop this? And I see that, but at the same time, and this is maybe a defeatist attitude, I'm not a defeatist. I think it's too little too late. I think the system that we have, the CMHC and basically the government of Canada, they cannot allow real estate to fail. It is way too big. And we kind of do have a permanent backstop because, you know, the bears that want prices to go down 40%, that would literally destroy the entire economy and country. So I kind of think, policy aside, I
Man,
kind
I
of think we're
think you're
stuck
being
with it.
man,
You
dude.
don't think
I
so?
don't know about that. Well, let's say okay. Let's say this. So from the peak in 2022,
Yeah.
we're down nationally 15-17%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like where are the fucking bodies? Like, dude, like, so you're talking about a 30-40%. Like, there's no goddamn banks blowing up anywhere. Like
No.
banks are still sitting with like extremely low provisions. Like, there's nothing's blowing up. So, man, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I think you could almost make the argument that if you're actually serious about trying to grow the economy and try to funnel more investment into more productive measures, what you need
Mhm.
to do is like remove some restrictions around business investment, get out of the way. Oh, and by the way, like maybe stop incentivizing people to make all their money in real estate and try to say, hey, like, why don't you go out there and create businesses and create, you know what I'm saying? Like from
Yeah.
that perspective, and I think that another government might be a little more sympathetic to that. I don't think, if you go down 30%, like,
Yeah.
is the economy going to blow up? Like, dude, we're halfway there.
Yeah.
I don't see
No,
any,
and
there's not even any smoke anywhere,
well, I
you know?
agree with you as far as like, look, how do you incentivize, and this is a larger political conversation, how do you incentivize people to start a business if they're being taxed to death, or to keep their money or their business or their world headquarters in the country? Why wouldn't somebody move overseas or move to the States? I think that's part of
Well,
a
or
much larger
why don't they just leverage as much as they can and buy the biggest house and accrue the tax-free capital
tax-free
gains?
capital gain.
Like
Yeah.
so like you know what I'm saying? Like if you're actually serious about trying to bring like improve productivity, drive business investment, we have a fundamental problem in that we've made it too easy to make money in real estate and not
Yeah.
easy enough to make money creating a productive business. And that's
Yeah.
got to levelize. And part of that is like, I'm sorry, but you can't be throwing government backstops at 1.5 million mortgages so some guy can live on the water. Like
I,
that's
I,
crazy.
this is counter to what most real estate agents would say. I don't disagree. I've said that for a long time. I think the fact that I guess on the flip side, if you didn't have the CMHC backstopping the banks would probably be more aggressive and charge higher, and then it would just fall back on the consumer, would it not? So I don't know
Yeah,
what the
so
answer
no,
is.
that's a fair point. So you can see it in the spread between insured and uninsured mortgages,
Sure.
right? So uninsured mortgages are, call it 50 basis points higher than
Yeah.
insured. Yep.
Yeah.
And so there you go. So like banks recognize that there's, a bit of risk that they have to bear and they charge for that.
And
Right.
it's almost like we're punished. Those of us that don't need the insurance and have done well to put down, you're being punished for making a higher down payment, but I guess it all comes out in the wash in the end, anyways. The banks seem to be doing
Yeah.
fine, is the point of it, unless you're TD and it's just scandal after scandal, right?
Man, I think there's more scandals just hiding. I don't, listen, there's a saying, there's never just one cockroach. If you see one cockroach, there's a bunch of them. I
Yeah.
don't think Canadian banks, I think they've been very fast and loose with a lot of the rules.
Well, and we talked not too long ago. I won't name names about, what happens when you buy a pre-construction condo for $600,000 and then it's down 40%, but magically the appraisal 4 years later, comes in at the price they paid because
Yep.
that particular bank doing the appraisals that are financing it, well, they're just giving you the appraisal for what you paid, even though pre-con has completely tanked. There's a
Yep.
scandal waiting to happen.
Yeah, listen, I think that at some point that's going to make its way into the media.
Yeah.
There's definitely people trying to figure out how to put pen to paper and write about that. And yeah, I think that's something OSFI is going to want to comment on. The tricky thing is it's actually good risk. It's a good risk practice, right? So just to explain to your listeners what we're talking about, like you've got some of these condo developments that were pre-sold at peak, and just to use a round number, let's say they were sold at $1,000 a square foot.
Yeah.
So you're contractually obligated to deliver $1,000 a square foot on this unit to the developer when it completes. But the resale market might only be, just to use again a round number, like 700,000 today.
Yeah.
So you got like this 30% gap that where a bank would come in and say, well, we'll loan you 80% of the fair market value.
Yeah.
But you got to deliver the full 1,000 a square foot. So in other words, if the banks were underwriting properly, they would say, look, we can't loan you the full 80% of the $1,000 a square foot. We'll loan you 80% of what we think it's worth, which leaves this big gap. Okay.
Yeah.
Now what we're seeing, to your point, is magically a lot of these developments, the appraisals are coming in line with the original purchase price, which is to say that they're coming in like 20 to 30% above the actual resale value.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start looking a little closer, you realize, well, sometimes in some cases, the banks that are giving these blanket appraisals would appear to also be the same ones that have taken on a bite of the loan syndicate and have some exposure.
I don't want to use the word fraud, but
it's not fraud. I mean, it's tricky, right? You could argue that they're in violation of the Bank Act. So you could argue that, but all that to say, if you're a bank risk manager, you would rather take a $200 million known problem and turn it into a whole bunch of smaller potential problems, right? Because one, you're going to get a lot of questions from shareholders. You're going to have to provision against it. The regulator's going to come in and be like, hey, man, tell me about this. The other one, you can kind of and you can smooth it out, and maybe it becomes a problem, maybe it doesn't. You can't blame them for doing it. But to your point, I would argue it's definitely in violation of the Bank Act. And OSFI is going to have something to say about that, I think.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's just the basic smell test is you buy a pre-con for $600,000 at the peak in 2021. And then today, the appraisal comes in at $600,000. Something doesn't make sense. Pre-con has tanked. You paid tomorrow's price today. And then you're like, if an XYZ bank was the one that did the appraisal today, but XYZ bank was the in-house lender for that developer when you bought, it absolutely stinks. But I would love to see that on the front cover of a newspaper, but I think
we'll get there. I know a few reporters that have tried to figure out how to make this work. It's just really hard to prove that it's happening. It's harder than you'd think.
Yeah.
But a few outlets have tried to figure out how to turn this into a narrative, let's say. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe more on that next time. Listen, I know we both got to run. There's so much more that we could have covered, but I appreciate your time, and I'm going to put this up on the blog. I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions. I might bug you offline. I might ask you a couple of things, but anyways, good to see you again, buddy.
Well, listen, you too, man. You've always been really gracious with your time coming down to meet me and meet my clients. So if you want to do a follow-up at some point in the next, few weeks or months, I'm happy to jump back on, man, because we've got lots to talk about.
Amazing. Okay. And if I don't talk to you, are we saying Merry Christmas yet? I can't believe it, but hopefully I'll talk to you before then.
That sounds good, buddy.
All right. Have a good one. See you, Ben. Take care.
Right, see you, bud.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, that is it for part 2 with my interview with Ben Rabidoux. I hope you enjoyed. And as a reminder, we put this up on TRB for you this week, but it shows you that, yes, we do a podcast called, of course, The Last Honest Realtor, and it is up every single week. We put it on YouTube for you to watch. We put it everywhere you can get a podcast for you to listen to. Encourage you, if you're looking for more content, to take a listen or a watch. And thank you again for watching today's video. Bye for now.